I've gotten the chance to see it. It's really good. I love this movie so much the more I think about it. And the second time that I saw it this weekend, I loved it even more.
And burst onto the scene in a run of comics quite literally called Detective Comics. Well, maybe you gotta detect more, dialing the noir meter all the way up and the pulp all the way down. Or at least a little bit down.
Dude, this is the Batman film I've waited my entire life for. And I don't know if Batman will ever be as well translated, as well adapted, as cared for as what Matt Reeves and Robert Pattinson have done with the character.
What trash and bullshit you say? Well, race swapping is bullshit about these androgynous, ambiguity-filled
If you asked me where my fascination and obsession with the Batman mythos started, I would tell you it was seeded with Lego Batman on my brother's PS2 when I was around 6, and then bloomed with Batman Arkham Asylum on the Xbox 360 2 years later. Of course, in reality, Batman Begins on DVD was probably my first glimpse at Batman media beyond merchandise, but Lego Batman is something I love to this day. I've had my ups and downs about Batman Begins. I probably loved it as a 5-year-old, but once I played Lego Batman and subsequently Batman Arkham Asylum, I noticed how dull Batman Begins was in comparison. It took this insane, fantastical, colorful universe filled with gothic wonder and turned it into something mundane. I knew that you could have a dark, believable, and grounded Gotham. The Arkham series showed me that exact thing. So why did Christopher Nolan decide to make this hyper-realistic take that's almost ashamed of calling itself a Batman franchise? It's unfortunate that for so long the mainstream media saw the colorful and wacky versions of superheroes done so bad that they blamed the concept itself. Bringing the comic books on screen as they are drawn is campy, stupid, and bad. No, the only way superheroes can be taken seriously in film is if they detach themselves from the comics as much as they can, in an attempt to reach the comic audience by name, but also to put the casual audience there too. Fortunately, many comic book films have grown out of this phase, but the Batman to your average person is Christian Bale. Christopher Nolan took key examples of good writing from the comics, but threw away any semblance of style. However you feel about the Dark Knight trilogy is fine. I like the Dark Knight and Batman Begins. Many times I loved them, but as a huge fan of Batman and his world, Batman is more than about realism and groundedness. My ideal Batman film respects its roots. It respects its source material as art. It doesn't attempt to claim superiority over it by making it as quote-unquote realistic as possible. It takes that source material and adapts it into something unique while retaining the components that make up the Batman mythos. For the longest time, ever since I was a kid, I was told by everyone, even other Batman fans, that the older Batman films were cringy, tasteless, and just terrible. The Dark Knight was art, the rest were commercial trash. This perception kept me from actually revisiting them to see for myself what they really were. What I discovered in Tim Burton's films was a passionate, calculated, and artistic vision that heavily impacted Batman. Gotham was fantastical and exaggerated. Batman's rogues gallery was wacky yet dark. The music I love so much in LEGO Batman games now fit to its original purpose, and it was beautiful. The greatest strength of Tim Burton's films is their style that inspired Batman the animated series and then inspired Batman Arkham. It all connected. I then eventually, through trial and error, watched Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, which walked a very thin line, that it created a visual joke out of the comic. They took it so far in the wrong direction that the next director felt the need to do the exact opposite. While Batman Begins did respect the seriousness of the character, its understanding was surface level, and in its attempts to make Batman so real, it destroyed the noir style that defined him in the first place. All in all, while I respect the Nolan trilogy greatly, while I respect Tim Burton's films and even Forever to an extent, all of them lacked a key component, as if they were all combined together, you would get a perfect Batman film. Batman as a character to me is about exaggeration done realistically enough to reveal something about our world. To use Gotham City as an exemplar for what the troubles of Earth might resolve to, if not fixed. what hatred and pain will produce if we are defined by it. Batman is the illusion of good and evil, corruption of mankind into twisted morals and then back again. Batman is noir, the hard-boiled detective who loses his grip on morality after visiting the underworld of his once great city. Batman, through the vibrant costumes and the horrific cityscapes, reveals something real about humanity. Batman is the fall of man, and subsequently, hopefully, its redemption. Near the end of Act 2 of The Batman, Riddler has peacefully given himself up in a retro mid-20th century diner. The place is lit, yet empty, wedged in an alleyway it may not have consented to. For the dilapidation of a city failing to quell the great conflict that is human nature has not all been yet able to move on from the past. The magnificent past, the ideal 1950s, the boomers, is squeezed within its last breath between two newer structures hidden in darkness. Riddler, now Edward Nashton, tells the police he has just ordered his pumpkin pie. To me, this seasonal dessert representing harvest near the end of fall also represents a question. Who gets the chance to harvest a piece of the pie in this world? Because a great pie only means a greater struggle to divide such a pie. The great pumpkin pie symbolizes a great conundrum. For the second time, I watched The Batman and realized many issues I had with the film were much less significant than I originally thought, although still a worry in my mind for a future sequel. My nitpick was while The Batman was a great combination of the elements I loved in the previous iterations, its balance of those elements were not absolutely perfect. When the Iceberg Lounge was introduced, I was ready to see that iceberg, that towering blue crystal in an atrium of magnificence, but instead, I got a warehouse filled with flashing lights and concrete. I won't lie, I was disappointed. Was Matt Reeves afraid that fantastical comic booky elements like the Iceberg Lounge were just too wacky for this grounded universe? In my mind, my perfect film would embrace those elements. I was confused, why even call it the Iceberg Lounge at all? Upon a second viewing, I finally realized that the club was created from an abandoned iceberg fishing warehouse, and that obvious explanation cracked away at a key issue I had with the film. While I still hope this universe will embrace those more comic booky elements and not hide them, I at least knew that the writers had a vision behind this location. It wasn't just a nod to the comics for the sake of it. This dark, trashy club represents a lack of influence the Penguin has currently. This is what he's working with. He hasn't earned the Great Iceberg Lounge just yet. With that criticism of the film almost redeemed, I wondered, what's my piece of the pie? What's my unique take on the greatest Batman film yet? The one that did what I wanted filmmakers to do with the character for so many years. My most anticipated film of all time, maybe my favorite film of all time. What could I say to the internet that hasn't already been said? The day I was writing this script, I was considering scrapping the video entirely. But then, out of desperation for inspiration, I turned to a video essay I created that heavily impacted my presence on YouTube.
Because the Joker is not a comedy, not a hero's journey, not an action flick, not a romance, nor horror. It is simply a tragedy.
This deeply flawed yet very passionate video of mine from 2019 convinced me for a period of time that I officially got my spot on YouTube, that I got a piece of that pie. This video was my first and really only video to blow up on this site, and I had not intended that at all. I made the video knowing it would be seen by a couple hundred people at most, but I quickly realized that a single video was not enough, and all it really earned me was hundreds of inactive subs and thousands of critical, ignorant, and unempathetic comments about everything I did wrong in the video. Today, I can't really say I agree with everything I said in that video, at least the way in which I worded it. I've grown a lot as an editor and a writer, yet never got that type of recognition again. It had been so long since I fully viewed the video that I forgot what the main point of it was. A point that inspired me to keep working on this script.
I think the most important thing you can take away from this video is that tragedies will teach you the most about you.
Truly, what I enjoy about this new film is how it encompasses the ambiguity of Bruce Wayne. The Batman is very much a character study of Bruce Wayne in the same way Joker 2019 was. Batman here is not the altruistic person he believes he is, at least his attempts to be, such as the unwillingness to use guns and kill people, are hindered and limited by his own personal trauma. He so very much wants to believe he is protecting the people of Gotham and honoring his family legacy, but really we see a man who is so molded and damaged by the death of his parents that he partially seeks to relive his trauma by scaring the lowest kinds of criminal.
I'm vengeance.
The convenience store robber, the vandalizer, the self-absorbed gang member.
You know, people think of him as a hero, but the truth is this is a guy who's trying to make sense of his life, and he's never gotten over these events, and it's the only way he can make sense of anything. He's trying still to cope with what happened to him. He's stuck, actually, in certain ways at being 10. He hasn't evolved in certain ways. And so every time he sees someone who's doing something that he thinks is contributing to the criminal sort of side of what's going on in Gotham, to them, it's the same people who killed his parents.
All the people Batman finds himself beating to a pulp are not much different from Bruce Wayne, really. In fact, the difference here is their circumstances at birth. These are people with trauma and or a distorted perspective who can't recover in the way that protects them from incarceration like Bruce. Bruce believes Bruce Wayne won't be listened to otherwise. Not as himself, but as Batman, he can express himself like spray paint on the columns of a government building, like face paint of a wannabe gang leader, like the mascot drop helmet of a desperate drops abuser. Maybe if I can pressure new recruits into brutalizing an innocent man, maybe, just maybe, I might feel like I'm in control of something for once. Maybe this gun, this abuse of power, will finally get me what I need to drown my sorrows in. Maybe this suit of armor and Kevlar, this body I have trained to fight for years, will suffice if only to be heard. Maybe punishing people, like the one man who wronged me and my family a decade ago, will make this pain go away. If this city, this world is so cruel and unfair, why be fair in return? Why be a good person? The Batman is about a man realizing that his special little circumstance is one of many, a lucky position in a world of never-ending tragedy. Bruce can't make an exception for himself and not be a hypocrite at the same time. He doesn't understand this until he meets Selina Kyle, who he believes is in it for the money, and that her friend got herself kidnapped and possibly murdered. But then Selina shares perspective that this behavior is the result of injustice she is paying back. Why can Batman play unfair, but she can't? Bruce, for some reason, never thought to understand the people he punishes. He loves the idea of protecting Gotham, the idea of saving the city, but he doesn't understand that the people he haunts and beats up are Gotham City, created by circumstances opposite to Bruce's. He is perpetuating a cycle he selfishly believes he is above because of a fancy suit.
You don't really care about his motives, whether he loves or hates you. I think somewhere deep down, you're just terrified. Because you're not sure he's wrong, huh? You think they deserved it, huh? You think they deserved it.
Over a year ago, I created a video titled The Batman, the Neo-noir legacy of the Dark Knight, which sought to praise the noir aesthetic of the first trailer and explain why it's so integral to the character. Not only does this film offer the narrative implications of a noir, but the subjectivism of a neo-noir. Taxi Driver, released in 1976, directed by Martin Scorsese, fought back against the old Hollywood by embracing grimy film grain, a saturated color scheme, and expressionism. This expressionistic subjective way of filming is done to achieve immersion by not showing the hyper-real version of events, but the emotional, sensual, and personal version of events, like we might see in our own memories. Memories that are not perfectly clear and are biased towards certain aspects.
The audience is held at arm's length watching the movie, saying, it's beautiful, but they're held at arm's length and they're not drawn into it. Then somewhere we have failed.
Yeah, I mean, that idea of that kind of beauty, that's almost too clean. It's this idea of this texture. There's a way in which beauty can be, you can look at it and it can remove you and it can become an object that you're watching from a distance and admiring, as opposed to, in a way, it's about making things imperfect and not letting things be too too clean in a way that makes it feel, again, like that thing you could put on a wall. Not that these images, all of these images could be put on the wall, but they've got that visceral quality. The movie had to have a very visceral side to it, and that it happens in the visual. It's a critical part of it. We're trying to take you into an experience.
Multiple times we see first-person perspectives of different characters. We hear what they hear, the bias that their memory has on these events. Batman walking into the first crime scene is biased towards the eyes of the cops judging him. Bruce during the funeral is biased towards the conversations of the people around him, the suppressed anger of an unprivileged Gothamite. He singles out the man judging his circumstance as if he wanted it. This film wants you to feel the horror of Gotham City, to feel the friction as the Batmobile makes a hard left turn, to feel the psychosis in Edward's long, disturbing breaths. The Batman is about immersion, putting us in Gotham with these characters.
From not just most superhero movies, but most movies in general, which sort of feel like hyper-real now. And
Yes.
especially big budget films. So I'm curious about that decision and maybe why you wanted the film to look this way.
Movie making, and it's been this way because I started making movies when I was a kid. And it was always a way for me, I didn't realize it as a kid, but I realize it now, it's a way for me to make sense, to make meaning. And so I'm trying to, even when I'm doing a kind of blockbuster film, it has to be personal for me. If it isn't personal and I can't connect in that way, I can't sort of attune my compass so that I can be the leader of this project, and I can't tell whether or not, I always want to draw in the creativity of my collaborators, but I have to be the compass to say, wait, we're going in the right direction or we're the wrong direction, or I won't know where to put the camera. I won't know all of those things unless it feels very personal.
As I've said before, Gotham as a concept is exaggerated to a degree at which its diagnosis of real social troubles are clear and noticed. Gotham is a subjective, dramatic take on the urban section of our world. From the perspective of someone struggling in a struggling neighborhood filled with crime and poverty, Gotham isn't so far-fetched. They can't see the bright parts of their city anymore after what it has done to them. Gotham City is our thoughts on a bad day where everything feels dull and fake. When you look outside and feel powerless. It's only a subjective take dependent on your circumstance. During the highway chase about halfway through the movie, we are locked on the perspective of Batman and Penguin. We see both avoiding their obstacles. Due to Penguin's reckless driving, he is causing accidents on the road, and his last move that purposely puts himself above the safety of everyone else is supposed to stop the Batmobile in its tracks. As the trail of cars begin to swerve into each other and the 18-wheelers begin to crumple and flip, we are left with a blockade of civilians who violently explode. Their faces are unknown, their panic completely unacknowledged because our characters haven't acknowledged them. Bruce is so focused on punishing his victims, so focused on letting his parents know that he can fight back, that he doesn't actually save the people he intends to protect. Batman arguably provoked this situation, surely causing many deaths, and worst of all, he got the wrong guy. This Batman is extremely flawed, making too many exceptions for his reckless behavior. The Batman is a slow burn for its main character. He slowly realizes his own hypocrisy and flawed nature throughout the film, not through self-reflection, but through the perspective of people in different circumstances, but with the same pain. The final nail in the coffin, of course, is Edward Nashton, the Riddler. As many critics and writers will point out, Riddler represents the fatal flaw with Bruce's personal exception. If Bruce can use vengeance to express his pain and suffering, so can everyone else. Vengeance is the language of suffering that can spiral into the creation of a vicious cycle. Edward is inspired by this use of vengeance, and Batman has shown him that our pain needs to be externalized, and injustice justifies it. Bruce realizes he can't just punish people, he can't just be vengeance, he has to be more than that. He must become a beacon of hope, because anger and hatred won't cure trauma. It will worsen it. It will perpetuate trauma for others like a trail of dominoes. And you can't fight City Halloween. Only hope can help us heal. Help us bring justice to those after us. What I love about this film is that this is the most morally ambiguous and arguably the most toxic Bruce Wayne yet. But it's easy to empathize with someone who you understand. We get why this guy is an antisocial asshole who can't respect the man who raised him, who needs to use violence to prove himself because he can't any other way. With this said, the Batman is clearly thematically different to something like Joker or even Taxi Driver for a key reason. Arthur Fleck and Travis Bickle are troubled people with trauma who make an exception for themselves. They hate their city for torturing them, for abandoning them. Travis hates the prostitutes on the streets, but is angry when his date is offended by his invitation to a porn theater. Arthur Fleck believes that public humiliation, abuse, and his conditions justify extreme violence towards people more privileged than him. Both end up turning to violence in the end. Tragedy strikes them, and one gets lucky enough to get away with it. Travis's violence from an outside perspective is seen as heroism, but if you really get to know him like we did, his true intent wasn't so innocent. Bruce Wayne is a tortured hermit who closes himself off and turns to violence to ease his own pain, yet hides this behind a crusade for justice. What makes the Batman unique here is that rather than being a tragedy, it becomes something much more hopeful, a redemption. Bruce must now recognize that his circumstances have made it possible for that redemption. People like Arthur Fleck are morally wrong and deserve to be incarcerated, but they are not born evil. They were molded into it by injustice, and we can't ignore that fact. There is a root evil, an unfortunate nature that cannot be ignored. Batman, as a symbol of hope, should strike the heart of injustice, not the victims of it. This was by far the most relatable Bruce Wayne on screen yet. I connect to characters who aren't perfect because I'm not perfect. There are things I've gone through that I've taken years to get over. I've been toxic before, I've emotionally hurt people, and people have emotionally hurt me. Even if I've greatly improved as a person, it still lingers over me. Like Bruce in this movie, many times I feel like my self-worth is only valid in the context of other people's approval. And without those people, I feel pathetic and alone. And with this pain, there's nowhere to externalize it. It becomes so hard to keep it in. I can see myself within Bruce, struggling to keep it in. In the same way that tragedy can teach us about the imperfections corrupting within ourselves, a redemption can inspire us, give us hope that maybe, just maybe, we can fix ourselves.